Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israeli youths protest the destruction of the Amona outpost, the UN General Assembly passes yet another set of biased resolutions, and the new Israeli ambassador to Turkey arrives in Ankara. I'm Aaron Porras here with the latest news in Israel. It's December 1st, which means that the clock is ticking just a little bit louder for the Amona outpost. Those against the decision to tear the settlement down, though, are hitting the Israeli streets to make their opinions very clear. Several dozen Israeli youths participated in a demonstration near the Amona outpost last night. They blocked a major highway with rocks and tires, which they then set on fire. Most of the activists took off after police rushed to the scene and arrested two for disturbing the peace. The High Court of Israel ordered all residents to be out of Amona by the 25th of this month before its subsequent destruction, because it was found to have been built on privately owned Palestinian land. When several houses on the outpost were razed back in 2006, more than 220 protesters were hurt in a confrontation with security forces. Now, with the entire village on the chopping block, right-wing politicians are racing against the clock to secure a solution, as the defense establishment prepares for what may become another violent showdown in just a few weeks' time. The United Nations celebrated yesterday its annual International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people by passing 6 resolutions condemning the Jewish state. Israeli UN Ambassador Dani Danon is slamming the developments as yet another example of the daily bias confronting Israel in the General Assembly. The first bill to pass was the so-called Jerusalem Resolution, which ignores all Jewish and Christian ties to Jerusalem and uses only Arabic Muslim names for the Temple Mount. The Palestinian UN representative expressed gratitude over the passing of the resolutions, but stressed that in his eyes, the anti-Israel resolutions didn't go far enough.
Mr. President, while grateful for this support, we cannot conceal our deep disappointment and frustration at the absence of serious efforts to uphold political and legal responsibilities towards the question of Palestine, the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Only 7 of the UN's 193 member states opposed the measure, including the United States, Canada, and of course Israel. 8 other member states abstained from voting on the Arab-submitted resolutions, which go on to dismiss all Israeli laws and actions over Jerusalem and its holy sites as illegal. The other resolutions pledged UN support for Palestinian rights against Israel, a new propaganda campaign advancing only the Palestinian side of the conflict, and the creation of a new supposed fact-finding mission for journalists to cover occupied territories. Yet another draft demanded that the Jewish state withdraw from the Golan Heights and immediately hand it over to war-torn Syria. Washington opposed each of the bills and blasted the world body for its disproportionate number of resolutions condemning Israel. The American representative insisted that the General Assembly's actions are counterproductive and only further damage prospects for peace. Israeli ambassador to the UN Dani Danon also condemned the General Assembly's actions and used his time on stage to stress the Palestinians' historic refusal to move towards an agreement despite the many chances afforded to them.
The Palestinians still don't want peace, they still don't want a state, and they still don't want to end the conflict. Every time there is a possibility for progress, every time there is an opportunity to choose a better path for their people, they choose the path of violence, rejection, and bloodshed. Mr. President, let us not forget that the leaders of the Zionist movement accepted the UN plan, despite all the risks, despite the threats of genocide against the Jewish people by Arab leaders. These brave leaders accepted the plan because they knew it offered the best hope for the restoration of Jewish independence after 2,000 years, and because they believed it was possible to live side by side with our Arab neighbors in the land of our forefathers. But the Arab leadership was not willing to accept the Jewish state under any conditions. Make no mistake, this was not about pushing for a better deal. a working paper of the UN Secretariat from July 1949 stated clearly, and I quote, "The Arabs rejected the United Nations partition plan in its entirety. Their goal was clear. This was not about establishing another Arab state. It was and remains about opposition to a homeland for the Jewish people."
Several resolutions have been passed by UNESCO over the past few weeks, as well as another set of resolutions just passed yesterday by the UN General Assembly, which claim that the Temple Mount and all of its history are solely Muslim holy sites. Well, an ancient piece of papyrus has recently been discovered on that very same Temple Mount, and it's said to be the oldest document ever found containing Hebrew letters. Times of Israel reporter Ilan Ben-Zion sat down with ILTV's Steve Leibowitz to tell of the incredible cooperation between the Israeli authorities and the Jordanian Waqf that led to this historic discovery.
Well, the papyrus has been radiocarbon dated to about 2,700 years ago. So the time period we're talking about is the late First Temple period during the Kingdom of Judah. And the text in Paleo-Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, that appears on this scrap of papyrus mentions Jerusalem, which, if indeed it is an authentic document, would be the earliest known mention of Jerusalem in Hebrew. There are earlier ones in Akkadian from the Amarna letters and in other languages, but this is the oldest one we would have in Hebrew. And the second find is not so much, it's not new in and of itself, but they published, archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority published a compilation of works that had been done on the Temple Mount as part of some sort of agreement with the Waqf that any sort of maintenance work that had to be done, whether it's laying pipes or cables, they would bring in Israeli archaeologists. And so during these maintenance works, they unearthed a number of finds, including bones, pottery, and olive pits dating to roughly the same period as the papyrus, incidentally. But these are works that have been going on for about 10 years.
It seems these discoveries and the cooperation, in fact, between the Israeli authorities and the Waqf seems to fly in the face of this UNESCO decision. And maybe the time that this came out was quite appropriate and quite interesting, no?
There have been a number of people talking about the coincidence of these two events. I know that the conference that both of these were announced at has been scheduled for several months, but everyone involved has insisted that it's merely a coincidence. Anything beyond that is speculation, but it seems to be well-timed. The cooperation also flies sort of in the face of people who say that, not enough cooperation is being done, that all antiquities that are on the Temple Mount, all the archaeological significance on the Temple Mount is being destroyed, and that nothing is being done by Israel or its authorities to protect that. Whereas in this case, it seems as though they actually are, there is something being done, and these are, rare pieces of data from the Temple Mount.
But are Israeli authorities from the Antiquities Authority making any changes, doing anything that is damaging or significantly altering the Temple Mount area, like the resolution for UNESCO seems to indicate? Have you found any of that?
I have not. There was a state comptroller report that has been barred from publication by the Knesset that said that there was damage done on the Temple Mount in 2007 during one of these operations, but the exact findings of it I'm not familiar with.
What else is in the pipeline that you can tell us about? Some new discovery that we don't yet know about that we're soon going to see on the pages of Times of Israel?
Well, at the same conference, there was a publication of a Muslim inscription in Arabic that the scholars involved have dated to the 9th or 10th century, which mentions separately, as two distinct entities, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Beit al-Maqdis, which is Arabic for the Dome of the Rock, meaning the Beit HaMikdash, or temple. And these scholars involved point to this as being evidence of the fact that not only were they considered historically distinct entities, but also that the Dome of the Rock, until the 20th century, was considered a successor to the temple because it was built atop the remains of the temple. Only in the 20th century did that historic Muslim narrative change, and has there been denial of there ever having been Jewish temples atop the Temple Mount.
Well, it's interesting. It's all about ancient history, but it's all happening today. Thank you so much for being with us at ILTV.
Israel's newest ambassador to Turkey landed in Ankara earlier today in yet another step towards normalizing diplomatic ties between the once strong Mediterranean allies. Israel's envoy, Eitan Naeh, released a public statement as soon as he arrived at his new post. In it, he made a special point of mentioning his host nation's support by sending firefighting aircraft and equipment to help the Jewish state extinguish last week's inferno.
We have a lot of work to do. I want to thank Turkey for the support, the aid that they sent to Israel, fighting the fires last week. We have a history of helping each other at times of need. And I'm looking forward to start work here officially.
Next week, after presenting his credentials to Turkish President Erdogan, the Israeli ambassador will get down to work trying to rebuild bilateral relations. No one expects the renewal of ties to be problem-free, however, particularly after the Turkish president publicly blasted the Jewish state with a series of harsh allegations just a few days ago. The once strong alliance was ruptured in 2010 when 10 Turkish pro-Palestinian activists were killed after they attacked Israeli commandos enforcing the naval blockade around Gaza. Israel has agreed to pay compensation to the families of those who died on the Mavi Marmara flotilla as part of the reconciliation deal signed in June. Turkey's new ambassador to Israel is expected to take up his new post this coming week. He's expected to be focusing on both nations' mutual fears over security risks in the Middle East, as well as the prospect of lucrative Mediterranean gas deals. It is my honor to say that joining me today to discuss some of Israel's security operations is former head of the Mossad security agency from 1996 to 98 and former Labour Party Knesset member Major General Dani Yatom. Thank you so much for coming in today.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll get right to it. My first question is about how Israel has recently struck over the border of Syria, ISIS and Hezbollah targets. Are our enemies being emboldened? Are they forcing our hand?
Firstly, it is important to say that what we know about those last bombings, as well as the bombings since 2013, is from foreign sources, because Israel never denied or took responsibility. Mm-hmm. So assume that Israel did it according to Arab sources. Then this is part of what should be the Israeli defensive policy, which says that we will not tolerate and we will not wait until the enemy will knock on our doors and will bomb us with new types of missiles. And when the Israeli establishment, military and security establishment, and the Prime Minister as well, they come to the conclusion that it is something that rolls towards Israel and has potential of big damage, then we will do our utmost in order to block it, in order to thwart it. This is the way we also treat terrorists. We do not wait until they will knock on our doors. We try to eliminate them as far as possible behind the borders of Israel.
So you're saying that these were preemptive attacks?
Yes, you can call it preemptive attacks, meaning before they attacking us, if it is true, yes, mm-hmm. then we are attacking them. This is preemptive, yes.
Okay, and then you kind of touched upon, the fact that there are foreign sources feeding this violence. Who are the foreign sources?
We know that the sources that claim that Israel is behind the last attacks that occurred 2 days ago, or less than 2 days ago, are Syrian sources and some other Arab sources. Now, yes, you touch something very interesting, because till nowadays, till today or till yesterday, the Syrian always use the space of deniability in order to not to blame Israel, and in order to not to give it a high
like the satisfaction.
a high attention. And what's going this time is a little bit bothering, because if the Syrians voluntarily went and published that Israel is behind the attack, it means that they want to signal to us that, yes, they know, as they think, yes, they know who is behind it, and that they keep their right to retaliate whenever they will decide.
And so just to be clear, when you say Syrian forces and Syrian news agencies, these are pro-Assad agencies?
I'm speaking about the Assad regime.
The Assad regime itself.
The Assad regime itself, yes.
All right.
The Assad regime and the Russians, which are involved in Syria since September 2015, they did not respond.
So that actually brings me exactly into my next question, is that with the Russians now involved with the Assad regime and aiding them, how does Israel operate in Syria without causing an international fiasco?
Well, firstly, it was published many times that there is a sort of communication, not coordination, but communication between the Israeli Defense Forces and the Russian forces deployed in Syria, in order to avoid any mistakes, and in order to avoid and prevent any clashes between us and the Russian forces. We do not want such claims, and they do not want such claims. So whenever somebody plans to do something, either in Lebanon or in Syria, those planners have to take into consideration the fact that there is a presence of Russians with highly sophisticated weapon systems, like anti-air missiles, the S-300 and the S-400, and some other weapon systems and radars of many kinds that can intercept Israeli aeroplanes while flying above in a Lebanese space or in a Syrian space. So we have to take it into consideration once we plan to attack targets in Lebanon or in Syria. Yes.
So, okay, so we know that Russian forces are not the only new players, or I call them new players in Syria. There's also Iranian forces, the IRGC, and their monetary and physical support for terror groups that are all around the Middle East. So we know that Iran is emboldening itself and that they're expanding their powers. What actions can be taken to limit Iran's expansion?
Firstly, we have to remember that the intervention of Iran started many years ago, even before the agreement that they achieved concerning their nuclear activity with the Europeans and the United States. But since this agreement, no doubt that they deepened and they enlarged their intervention. They support Iran, as I used to say, and I will say today as well, Iran is the source of all the problems and the source of all the troubles. They assist Shiites in Iraq, they assist the Assad regime, they assist the Hezbollah that fights today shoulder to shoulder with the Assad regime, but used to attack Israel and probably will return to attack Israel, and tries from time to time to warm up the situation, either in the Golan Heights or in Lebanon, close to the border between Lebanon and Israel. We have to look at it. We have to follow the Iranians. We have to gather intelligence on the Iranians, the way we are gathering intelligence about any other threats and any other enemies of us. And we have to make sure by persuading the world that the world will keep an eye on Iran, and that the world will make sure, the world, the United States of America, Russia, all those that signed the treaty, the agreement, the nuclear agreement with Iran, they should make sure that Iran will not seize the opportunity once there are any sanctions over Iran, that Iran will not seize this opportunity in order to harm more the democratic forces, including Israel. And of course, we have our capabilities to defend ourselves.
So, I know that Israel is far from the only country that is concerned about Iran's expansion. We also have other Sunni Muslim states, especially states like Saudi Arabia, that are as deeply concerned as anybody. Is that changing the relationship between Israel and the Middle East and Arab states?
The answer is yes. There are some developments that change today and started to change the Middle East since something like 5 years ago, since the Arab Spring, so to speak. Firstly, the fact that the Arab regime collapsed, like the regime of Mubarak, like the regime in Tunisia, in Yemen, the civil war in Syria. This is one development. The second development is ISIS. ISIS is a threat not only to Israel, but also to Jordan, to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt, to all the, so to say, moderate states. And the third development is the development concerning Iran. The Saudis are concerned, and the other states are concerned as well. There is the Shiite axis led by Iran, and the Sunnite axis led by Saudi Arabia. So what we see today is a new realm, a new realism. Israel and those countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and others share mutual interests. And I think that it is only a question of time until it won't be only a mutual concern, but also there will be some development which will bring us, all of us, to hold hands and to try and to cope against those threats that all of them are aimed against us and against the others.
Well, there is nothing like a common enemy to bring people together. I hope that the relations, as you say, go way far, further beyond just preventing terrorism and other violence. And thank you. I want to thank you again so much for coming in today.
You're welcome.
It was my pleasure, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Israeli foresters are already hard at work to begin to repair the devastating damage caused by 7 straight days of fire that raged across the nation. It's still being assessed, but it now looks like a little more than 10,000 acres of Israeli nature reserves were burned in last week's fires. And it might surprise some people to know that rehabilitation activities are focusing on how to promote natural regrowth, but not on replanting. Leading ecologists warned that reseeding, or the replanting of new trees too quickly, could actually weaken Israel's already fragile ecosystem. The plan is to wait for at least 2 years before introducing any new growth, and right now efforts are concentrated on protecting the surviving trees from invasive pests. Others want to see the eventual redesigning of wider buffer zones between human residences and the wooded areas. In the meantime, the experts are out in the field where they're gauging the extent of the damage and removing charred debris, which could take as long as 4 years to clean up. So mostly, it's just going to take time, but it's everyone's hope that the environment will soon begin the process of healing itself from the inferno as naturally as possible. There is great news coming from the Israeli Health Ministry recently, which is reporting that there's been a significant decline in the number of Jewish men who've contracted HIV. The figures were released ahead of today's observance of World AIDS Day. There were 125 new carriers in 2011, compared with 148 reported 4 years ago. The successes in lowering the number of patients is largely being attributed to the comprehensive national program launched by the Jewish state in 2013 in joint cooperation with a number of LGBTQ+ organizations. Efforts to combat AIDS and prevent the disease from spreading involve the opening of additional testing centers, condom distribution at popular LGBTQ+ hotspots, as well as increased social media campaigns targeting teens. The news wasn't nearly as positive in the Arab sector, however, and the country's largest AIDS clinic is reporting that 78 Arabs were diagnosed with HIV this year. A total of 988 Arab patients are being treated, including 62 below the age of 18 and 26 men over the age of 70. Israeli health officials are vowing to continue even more with their intensive efforts to reduce infection rates in the future. Mossad Israel is home to the widest variety of immersive international experiences for Jewish young adults 18 to 30. Find the right study abroad internship, service learning, or Jewish studies program to help you grow as a person, a professional, and a leader, while also developing a robust global professional network that includes Israelis and Jews from around the world. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. Hearing about all the amazing advances in medicine coming from the Jewish state is what inspired today's word, which is trufa, meaning medicine or cure. We all get sick from time to time, and if you're anything like me, it can really ruin your day or sometimes even your week. Thankfully, between the aches, pains, congestions, and other maladies, there's typically some sort of relief in the form of a trufa. A trufa can be synthetic, natural, herbal, or even spiritual, but try to keep in mind that not all trufot, or medicines, are in your best interest. So listen to your body, do what you feel is best, and remember that sometimes simply a good mood and a good night's rest are actually the best trufa. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. ILTV's weather forecast is sponsored by Adopt a Savta, taking care of Israel's lonely Holocaust survivors. Tonight should be rainy and cold with a low of 55 or 13 degrees Celsius. Over the weekend, temperatures are expected to drop as the high temperatures level out at about 67 or 20 degrees Celsius. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.83 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching, and see you tonight.